And then I think
Right.
back to Trump's first run for president, and I know you covered that, and I did as well. And we would have these quaint debates over, is Trump really racist? And this persisted throughout his first presidency and his subsequent runs for president. We would have these real debates, and a lot of very serious people would say, well, you don't know what's in his heart, and who knows. But I mean, when you hire a guy like Bovino, and when his entire agenda is to ethnically cleanse people, I mean, I feel like we really wasted a lot of time on this. And I'm wondering why you think there was such a debate when there was such a preponderance of evidence that this was exactly what Trump was talking about and what his agenda was.
Yeah. I think there's like this kind of reflexive tendency in American media to appear objective and unbiased, that you end up working really hard to manufacture defenses and justifications for what is explicit racism and bigotry and ultimately fascism, and we've seen this over and over again. And I think there's also, this kind of, I would argue maybe like liberal centrist kind of faith, this abiding faith in the like kind of myth of progressiveness, that like we are as a society always getting better and advancing, and that the horrors of the past could never visit the present, which I think makes people kind of disbelieve that something could be as bad as it actually is. And I truly think that I'm glad you brought up those kind of like tedious debates that feel so quaint now, and especially around the F word. Like there's so much debates about, is he a fascist? Is MAGA a fascist? And I think that debate's pretty resolved. You had why am I blanking on his name right now? Robert Paxton, The Anatomy of Fascism, one of the foremost scholars of fascism, declined to call Trump a fascist in the first term. Then, after January 6th, revises his opinion and says, yes, Trump is a fascist. And I think, we see that dynamic kind of at work all over the place right now.
You were talking about how right-wing influencers, have such cachet with the Trump administration, and some of them have been hired. And it made me think of Bovino's tenure when he was basically running ICE. I mean, he kind of ran it like an influencer. It was basically all for the gram. He had the Nazi-like trench coat. Of course, he said it wasn't, but I mean, anybody who studied the fashion, it was definitely reminiscent. He would go around Minneapolis and Chicago with just an entourage of security, even, famously to go take a leak at Target when he was in Minneapolis. Right. And so there's this great performance element to it. But at the same time, his policies were incredibly brutal, and he's cataloged as, actually like throwing, like a Molotov cocktail into a crowd, in Chicago. He wasn't just on camera. He was an active participant. And so how do we process all of this? Because, even if you have been a longtime critic of ICE and their tactics, this is a whole other level to have someone who is willing to engage in this kind of fascist behavior and to have the kind of power that he did.
Yeah, I mean, he definitely represented like a real escalation of things, and like, this like making what was barely subtext when it came with ICE, like, you know, text, like making it so explicit. And I think he recognized, you know, like when we think about MAGA in general, it is what Bovino was doing was kind of very part and parcel with that, you know, kind of very performative for the gram, for social media, you know, this kind of like very transgressive behavior, putting himself front and center. And I think it's also interesting when you step back and think about the reason for the surge in Minneapolis was largely because of the work of another influencer, like, you know, the Nick Shirley stuff, like when he manufactured the story about like the Somali daycare fraud,
Right.
you know, and like that was kind of the pretext for this surge in ICE deployment and you know, the crackdown, or the sweeps. And, you know, ultimately, like, we talked a little bit about kind of the grassroots, like, anti-fascist response, like, kind of running ICE out of town to a certain degree. And, you know, afterwards, when Alex Preddy and Renee Good are murdered, you know, Bovino says that Preddy, you know, was trying to massacre law enforcement, which, of course, was a, you know, bald-faced lie. We all watched the video.
Right.
And like the public backlash was just intense enough, I think, that even the Trump administration, you know, as shameless as it is, realized that it was on the back foot and had to do something, and, you know, pushes Bovino out. And I think like Trump kind of hilariously describes Bovino as like out there, like a little out there, which
Right.
like if Trump is saying that about you. So, you know, it's interesting that as much as like Bovino might appear fringe and farcical now, or even when he was, you know, still in Border Patrol, still the commander at large in these operations, you know, now that he's calling for 100 million people deported, like he's the kind of character, I think, in the MAGA universe that like opens the Overton window more and more again, you know, like he is so outrageous, so outlandish that, but eventually, you know, I wouldn't be surprised if the wider MAGA movement, if Trump kind of adopts this language of 100 million, you know, and so on and so forth. So I think he's an important character to keep an eye on.